morning. Welcome to Mornings with Mary Mark. Also, welcome to Mornings with Mary Margaret. It's me, Fifi. Say hello.
Oh, he says hello to me. So Juno's going to be very excited because Juno wants to play with him.
So today is Thankful Thursday. Oh my goodness, Finn. He's gonna play with my fingers now. I'm never going to be able to do anything. And Thankful Thursday. And I am thankful for quite a few things. I always start off Thankful Thursday by saying I'm thankful for my husband because it's true. And he is best person to be quarantined with. So you may be jealous, and that's fine because you should be. Shoot, this is harder than I thought it would be. So maybe it's here. So this is a book, a journal that I wrote in 2017. I think I wrote a little bit in 2018 too, but I wrote in it so much in 2017, and it really filled up 2017. So and the way I know about it being 2017 is because the brand is Leuchtturm. Let me spell that for you because it's German. Let me see if I can find where to spell it. It's yes, okay, no, Leuchtturm. 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 1917. 1917 is the dimensions. I think. Pretty sure it is. I'm not positive. It could be the year. I thought it was the dimensions of the thing, but that's not important. And it is sort of a fancy journal. Sorry, there's just like this piece of paper in here. I'm just gonna take it out for now. It's a fancy journal, and one of the nice things about it is each page has, instead of lines, it has dots. It's not. It is a grid, but it's not a grid of lines. It's a grid of dots. So it's a little bit easier if you do want to write on it. You can keep straight lines, as you can see, because you can see the lines. But if you want to do something that would look weird on a grid, it doesn't really make that hard. It doesn't make that not work. Words. I haven't had my coffee yet this morning, so I am looking specifically. This journal is something that I'm really thankful for, and I'm really thankful for the way I was able to use it in this year. I have one of these now. Part of the problem is I do not know where it is. I brought it somewhere, like on a trip sometime, and I cannot find it now, which is a pain. But it's also like I was just at a time in my life when this made a lot of sense, and I used it pretty much every day. Not just for journaling. I used it for taking notes in school and taking notes in church. I used it. You can see I made to-do lists, and I made them look cool. This is a bullet journal, in case you're wondering. This is a style of bullet journaling and a popular journal to use for bullet journaling. And it helped me sort out my thoughts a lot. And I got creative when I wanted to, but I didn't have to be creative if I didn't want to. Yeah, wow. Like I'm thankful looking back at this because I um, I did a lot of fun things that helped me remember this year. So um, when we were looking for houses, I made up lists of criteria that were important to me and things that I did want and did not want, and then ranked them on a point system. This is sort of how I chose my college too. So like if it was in a city, that would give it 5 points. If it were in a suburb, that would give it 3 points, and rural would give it 3 points as well. An attached garage, if it was in a city. Oh wait, hang on. Oh, house, like with a separate building from all the other buildings around. Okay, so I remember now. Each one of these is a criterion, and then I split it up points based on where it would be. So if it was in a city, it would give it a lot of points for it to be a house all by itself. It wouldn't give it as much of many points to be in a house by itself um, in a suburb or rural area because that's pretty typical in a suburb or rural area. So I'm talking like house versus condo here. Anyway, I'm getting off topic, but the the journal helped a lot. Helped me think. I really should have had coffee before I started this. Um, I am looking specifically right now for um, the not a piece of paper. Um, okay, so my favorite this time of my life, I was in grad school. 2017 was the last spring of 2017 was the last semester I was in grad school, and in that semester, I took a class called. Well, I guess don't remember what the class was called, but it's basically called trauma. Um, for those of you who don't know, I went to grad school to be a social worker. So, and I specifically was on that. Sorry, I'm like sinking in this couch. Um, I was specifically, they had like different tracks and categories of things that you did um, as a social worker and what you thought you were. Oh, dogs are getting fighty over here. Finn, slow your roll, bud. Whatever, they might eat each other. No. People are getting sick of each other here. But so I was on track to become a specifically, I forget what that was called. I mean the track that I was on was called Children, Youth, and Families. So a lot of different kinds of social workers took that track. People who wanted to be family therapists, people who wanted to. It was very similar to the child welfare track, which was a track that CPS caseworkers could take and get things paid for by the government because they were already working for the government, and as long as they promised to work for the government for a few more years after graduation, they could get their masters paid for. Um, so it had a lot of overlap with that. A little bit more freedom in the classes that you took, maybe not. Anyway, so the class that I took, spring of 2017, one of the classes I took was trauma, and the professor, Dr. Elizabeth Winter, um, at University of Pittsburgh. The professor was also my professor for my class on child abuse or child maltreatment. And I can't remember the names of these classes. And so they sound like really depressing classes. And, they were. Like, there's no getting around that. But they were also really useful and amazing classes. And I just lost it. I just like put it away and lost my mind. The Um, good gracious. The coffee's really, the lack of coffee is really getting to me. I really should have made coffee. But in the class that I took, trauma, we talked about all sorts of different kinds of trauma. We talked about we talked about individual trauma. Obviously, we talked about childhood trauma because that was something that um, the professor was she was involved with CPS. It's called CYF in Pennsylvania, but I forget what exactly like where her role was. I don't remember. She did a lot of training for. I think she still does. I think this is the part of her job that she still does. Did a lot of training for CYF caseworkers and teams, and she also was on the review board for content notice, I guess, when children die when they're in care. She was on the review board to see like because there's an investigation that goes on when a child dies when they have an open CYF case um, to see if there was something that CYF should have been doing that they were not doing, and see if there is anybody who needs to be fired, basically fired or retrained or moved around, shuffled into a different department. Just it's a big deal, obviously, when a child dies in care, because the state is technically, depending on what kind of care they are in, the state is technically their caretaker. So is technically in charge of their welfare. So if they die, the state needs to figure out what they did wrong. And so she was part of that investigation group group of people who investigated things. Um, so when she talked about trauma, she frequently talked about um, trauma as like from the perspective of people who work with children. Secondary or secondhand trauma is a um, the coffee though. Okay, secondhand trauma is a common thing. Secondary trauma that happens a lot to people who are social workers. It happens a lot to social workers. It happens a lot to other people too. But it is when you hear a lot about, especially when you hear about like one kind of trauma, or when you hear about one specific event, traumatic event that uh, and you hear about it, especially in great detail or something, it can cause you to have your own trauma from that. And it, um, depending on a lot of factors, including your personality and the people around you, and sort of like the support that you have from your job, um, that can be its own beast to deal with. And you have to deal with it slightly differently than you would deal with primary trauma because if you got it by helping people with their trauma, then you might very easily make it worse in some of the ways that people who are dealing with their own trauma deal with trauma. I'm just saying the word trauma, 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 trauma. Oh, there's a day here where I was babysitting this little boy. He's so cute. Oh man, he was so cute. He is still very cute. He is just older and farther away now. So I'm looking back at these notes from my trauma class that I have in this journal. And I'm trying to find this very specific set of notes because, and I must not have um, labeled them. The nice thing about the lectern is that it has a table of contents that you can make for yourself, and then every page is numbered so that you can like say where things are, so you don't have to like constantly be searching for them. But the problem is I wrote like trauma and then the date, not like what we covered. Um, hmm. So there was a, I'll just tell you, because looking at the journal is throwing me off and making my coffee brain not work, or my lack of coffee brain not work. So there was a project that we had to do, an assignment that we had to do in the trauma class. And the assignment was basically, I was talking about this last night with somebody. The assignment was basically do something to care for yourself in some way, and measure that, and then measure outcomes that you think could happen from that. So that's sounds confusing, but a lot of times, especially when you go to therapy or when you go to see a social worker, dogs, if you start barking right now, that is just a child on a scooter. She is not. She's not coming to take over the world. Okay, they might not bark. But when you go to therapy or go to see a social worker who is like helping you deal with your trauma, they will give you an assignment to do. They will give you things like homework. Like, oh, I think you should take up journaling, or try to meditate, or try to exercise more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what the assignment was basically to do that to ourselves. Was like we were all grad students. We were all we had grad students. Some of us were working jobs as well as doing internships. Like it was a uh, stressful time for pretty much everybody in that class. So um, the we knew we could use some self care or whatever. Um, so we just assigned ourselves some kind of um, like assignment to do that, to take care of ourselves in some very specific way. Juno, no, come here. Oh, Finn will come here. Oh, he's gonna get trapped in the curtain first. Oh, jeez. Okay. Yeah. Hi. So now this is Mornings with Mary Margaret and Finn. Yes. Finn is my co-host. Hello, Finn. So I'll talk to you, and you can talk to the people. So we let me let me simplify. The assignment that I came up with was don't lick the computer. Thank you. The assignment that I came up with was that I wanted to stay active, be more active during the day. So what I did was, the way I measured it was I wanted a certain number of steps per day because I wear a Fitbit, so it's easy enough to calculate. And then the things I wanted to measure was if I slept better and if my moods were better. So I my Fitbit also tracks sleep, so I would just track the number of hours that my Fitbit said I was in restful sleep, and then I would also track. That's the other thing I was trying to look in this journal was I had for a while like a mood tracker that I was using in the journal, and I also had it on my phone, so that it would remind me um, something like 3 times a day. So like every 6 hours or so, it would remind me. It would like pop up on my phone and say like, "What's your mood right now? Tell me, I want to know." And I would like rank various things. Um, And so then I could combine the data of looking at how much I was walking, and compare that to how much I was sleeping and what my mood looked like, and I could see if it had any effect. And I, I still have that project somewhere, and I still have that data too. Oh, he's gone now. Um, oh, 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 oh. Now you can see the fin. Um, it's very big head. Um, so I still have all that information. But I think the most helpful thing for me was to see that it did have an effect. Um, there were days when I just did not exercise as much. I tried in order to get like my step goals on these days. Would go for runs or I would go for an extra walk. Um, I was already like walking to grad school, walking to classes a lot. Sometimes I would take the bus, but most of the time I would walk. And so I would focus on walking more and taking the bus less. Um, or I would go for a run or something like that. And on days when I didn't do that, when I didn't have time or when I wasn't feeling well or whatever, the next day would be different. I would not have slept as well, and I would just feel generally less good, like less. I would be less resilient to the trials of the world. I guess is the way to put it. It wasn't like not walking was personally bringing my mood down. It was just I was not as able to withstand sort of the pressures of my regular life. Right, Finn? Yeah, Finn knows. Um, and it was really helpful to be able to see that on a on a chart to like that I chart that I made. Oh, Finn, you're so luxurious. Um, that where I could look at the chart and I could see myself and I could see my own habits and everything that was going on. And I'm really thankful for that class in general because it taught me a lot about the realities of traumatic events and how relative those are. Um, I think I personally have a tendency to downplay a lot of things, either things that I experience or even things that other people experience. I'm sort of a jerk that way uh, because they're not as bad as X. They're not as bad as like losing your house in Hurricane Katrina or whatever. Um, but if you've never lost your house in Hurricane Katrina, your body might react in similar ways. Um, like it still might be very bad for you to have a dog die or something like that. And when you realize how relative it is, you have like it forces you, if you have any empathy at all, it forces you to um, go easier on people. I mean, hopefully, primarily yourself, because heaven knows we don't have uh, enough ability to go easy on ourselves, but also on other people who are struggling in times when you're like, oh, that's just not that difficult. And I think right now is a very good example of that because there are some people who are really, really struggling with staying at home or being alone or are like they're just really scared about the diseases that are going around. They're really scared about the state of the world. And then there are some people, myself included on some days at least, that for whom it's just not a big deal. There's a lot of uh, sort of good things that have come out of this for some individuals, and so we can have a tendency to downplay. Um, sorry, we can have a tendency to downplay or dismiss um, what other people's feelings are in times like this, and using the empathy that I like had to learn to take this class, I was able to, or I am able to, when I like really, what is the phrase? When I apply myself, I am able to remember that it doesn't really matter what I think of the situation. It doesn't really matter if I think that's stressful. It doesn't really matter how I would do things differently than they are. What matters is their lived experience. And there are ways in which I can put myself into their sort of mindset and think about that, and it becomes more real, and I become more empathetic, um, empathetic. I don't know, but this class helped me do it, and this professor was very good at one of the things that we learned in the class or did in the class was she would give us an example of a situation that we were in, and we would have to no, not situation that we were in, of a client that we were working with. She would say like, okay, you are working with a woman who is pregnant and does not believe that she can be a mother because she has all of these things, these baggage in her life, and she doesn't believe that she can be a mother. And she's coming to you to ask for information on how to put her child up for adoption. And you need to explain to her in an empathic way why what she's feeling about being a bad mother doesn't necessarily match the reality of whether or not she is a bad mother. And so we would have to like, I think we had something like 2 or 3 pages of like a script that we had to write of like that conversation between us and this hypothetical mother. And it was just so immensely helpful. There were certain things we had to do in the script. You know, we had to like cite research, not just like blither on about things, but because they were always based around things that we were learning in class. So we had to cite research in ways that were probably at least a little bit unnatural for a conversation, but the way, I mean, that's sort of what we have to do in conversations as social workers anyway, is to explain to people what the research says about what they're feeling and experiencing, so that we're not just talking from our own experience, we're talking from this wealth of research that we have. And so you need to find a way to do that more and make it sound more natural than just like, well, in 2017 there was a study done by because that's people don't want to listen to that, and it can like turn people's ears off. So we had to write these scripts, and I still have every single one of them. Oh, Finn! Oh no! Don't step on the laptop, Finn. Okay, there was somebody jogging. He needed to check it out. But I still have every one of those scripts, and some of them I have legitimately like have become my life. Like I don't know that I ever went back and reread them as like a way to brush up on how to talk to people or help people through certain situations. But there are definitely a lot of those scripts, especially because I took at least 2 classes with this professor. So she does this with all of her classes. I took at least 2 classes with this professor. So there have been a few times when I have used essentially definitely the skills that I learned from writing those scripts, if not the scripts themselves. Because, yeah, because that's just like half the job. And not just like the job of being a social worker, but the job of living alongside people who are struggling um, with anything, with struggling that their dog is dying or dead, with struggling that they lost their job and they cannot get a new one because nobody is hiring, or with struggling with the concept of being immunosuppressed. Um, hey, hey, I don't know what she's barking at now, but with struggling with the concept of being immunosuppressed during a pandemic, and seeing your neighbors take it lightly and not seemingly care about you and taking care of you and your needs. Hey, come here. I aggressively kiss at her. She will. All right, hang on. We're going to put the dogs outside. And then I'm going to end this anyway. Go outside. Oh, couch and me. Okay. So anyway, I learned a lot from that class and that professor and those assignments about how to take care of myself when traumatic things come up in my life, how to go easy on myself and on other people, because trauma is a spectrum like most other things. And while there are some things that you look at, you're like, yes, that's traumatic. There are other things that you might be surprised to realize, oh, that would also be like life altering, and sort of like worldview shattering, even though it's a significantly less objectively impactful event. And then it also taught me a lot about, I mean, trauma is everywhere, right? My job, less now, but my jobs that I've had in the past, working with youth and the situations that I've worked with them, I came into contact with trauma pretty much every day. It was just part of the job. But living through that has taught me, like, pretty much every job, pretty much every interaction with people that you have over time has some association with trauma, either yours or the person you're talking to, or just the trauma that is present in the world at the time. And that being the case, this class was massively important. It taught me how to just live in that world where that is true. So I'm thankful for that class, especially now. But I use it regularly. And I think about this journal a lot because it's got all my notes from that class, or most of my notes from that class, as well as notes from my life. And it's really interesting to see those overlapping in sort of interesting and unexpected ways. So, yeah, that's my life. That's my story. Juno's back to bark at somebody, so I should probably end this. But it was good talking to you. Make good choices. Don't do drugs. And see you tomorrow for Flashback Friday.